they invaded peaceful nations.
This is a criminal regime.
Slaughtered innocent people.
They're performing murder and terrible crimes, but at the same time trying to make it look as though it's correct.
Committed genocide.
He likened the Jews to a virus.
But how did Adolf Hitler and his small band of criminal conspirators persuade the German people to follow him on this horrific path?
He's clearly insane. His mouth would foam with rage, as he's like a sort of a rabid dog.
This series offers a unique perspective on the Third Reich. It shows how Hitler and his inner circle created an illusion of justice and legality, while behind the scenes they subverted democracy and planned a monstrous secret conspiracy based on a warped ideology and phony science. It's the story of a gangster regime that used not only violence and suppression, but which carefully groomed the German people into willing complicity in the worst crimes in history. The story of the rise of the Nazi Party begins in the final days of World War I. A young soldier called Adolf Hitler is in hospital. He has been blinded in a mustard gas attack and is recovering from his wounds.
With mustard gas, you'd get irritation of the eyes, there would be blisters coming out over your body, you'd suffer from nausea, you'd be vomiting.
He had burning eyes, as he described it, like burning coals in his head.
Austrian by birth, Hitler makes Germany his home. He feels such a love for this country that he celebrates in his adopted town of Munich when Germany declares war in 1914. He signs up for the army. And he serves his emperor and his country, running messages under fire at the front line. He's brave and wins the Iron Cross First Class and Second Class. But he's also distant. He is seen by his colleagues as a peculiar misfit.
They thought he was a weirdo, an odd fish.
He never made friends easily. He wasn't a sociable person. He never had been, he never becomes one.
He was like sort of somebody who was a loner. People thought he was a bit strange and a bit odd.
He is compulsive in his cleanliness. With an aversion to smoking, drinking, and women, his comrades call him the White Crow and the Woman Hater.
They found him unwilling to engage in the normal social activities that soldiers do.
Gaunt, weak, and delirious, half blind from gas, this is a very different Adolf Hitler from the man who will terrorize Europe. This is Hitler at his lowest ebb. Then, as he lies recuperating, there comes news that would shape his life forever.
And one day in November, a priest comes into the ward, and the priest says to them, "The war is over, we've lost, we're going home."
World War I is over. Germany has surrendered.
Germany somehow had lost it without the French or the British ever being on German soil.
Hitler is utterly distraught.
The idea that you've suddenly been told that you've lost this war, and it seems to have come completely out of the blue, is of course going to make you absolutely berserk. And Hitler, as we know, was always the type of man who would go berserk at the slightest opportunity.
The painful question for Hitler is, how could he have been betrayed like this? Who could be responsible for this outrage? Crippled by despair, in his own words, he is plunged once again into blindness. He would later state,
I buried my burning head in the covers and pillows.
He said he cried more than he'd even cried on the day his mother died.
in his delirious state, the culprits swirl through his mind. He starts to blame those he sees as responsible. The Jews, the communists, the left-wing politicians back home who had meekly surrendered, even though the German army that Hitler had fought in was undefeated.
He later says, I felt intense hatred for the people who had done this to us. And the most convenient theory to subscribe to was this idea that people like him had been stabbed in the back.
He had been defeated, not through failure of military arms, but by the stab in the back, by effete politicians and corrupt Jewish bankers and financiers betraying the German people, betraying the great German army.
Hitler later wrote about how this moment transformed him forever.
When I was confined to bed, the idea came to me that I would liberate Germany, that I would make it great. I knew immediately that it would be realized.
There is another version of how he acquires his destiny. The story goes that during his hospital stay, Hitler was hypnotized by a psychologist, Professor Edmund Forster. Forster was treating Hitler's blindness, which he diagnosed as hysterical. In other words, caused by some mental trauma rather than physical injury due to gas.
And Forster said, "Sit up, man. How dare you give in to weakness?" So he sits up and he said, "Lesser men will stay blind, but greater men, titans, they'll overcome their blindness. Are you a titan?"
Using a candle, he convinces Hitler that if he could see the flame, then it would be proof of his uniqueness as a human being, and his destiny one day to lead Germany to greatness.
Where he's got this Svengali figure hovering over him saying, "Adolf, one day you will be the future rabble-rousing leader of Germany, and you will lead Germany back to becoming the greatest power in Europe."
It works. Hitler sees the flame and his sight quickly returns. Something has been awakened in Adolf Hitler.
He was thinking, actually, yes, you know what, maybe I am that type of man.
Although contended by some, this encounter goes a little way to explain Hitler's conviction that he will go from a simple corporal to a great leader. Just days after the German surrender, Hitler emerges bewildered and battered into a world in total chaos. The once proud German people are wretched and downtrodden. There's poverty and starvation. The emperor he had fought and suffered for has abdicated. Law and order is breaking down. A revolution is sweeping across the country. For a patriotic German soldier, there is nothing. The German army is being disbanded. He has no education, no social standing, zero prospects. He returns to his chosen home, the Bavarian city of Munich.
Munich was in total political chaos at the end of 1918, beginning of 1919.
What he witnesses from his dingy apartment in the city is frightening.
There'd been a socialist revolution, a Marxist was running Bavaria, the socialists were in power.
The old order is out. Chaos reigns. Leftist thugs are fighting running battles with militants from the right. Violent confrontations between the two sides are commonplace.
There were fights, bitter fights on the streets every night.
Bloody battles. I mean, hundreds. There are 700 deaths in something like 8 months.
To Hitler, the hated Marxists are the enemy within. They are dangerous as they are part of an international movement with no sense of patriotism. Communism despises the very idea of nationhood and has no respect for the German nationalism that Hitler so admires. Then comes something that makes a bad situation even worse. A spark that risks igniting it all in the summer of 1919. Across Europe, the victorious Allies are gathering in Paris. On the 28th of June 1919, they and Germany sign a momentous document, the Versailles Treaty. There is widespread rejoicing on the streets. But for Germany, Versailles spells catastrophe. The treaty demands revenge for World War I. It's a further humiliation which deeply affects Hitler. He cannot accept that Germany deserves such unjust treatment.
Nobody could have believed that Germany would receive such a harsh settlement in the Treaty of Versailles.
Germany is ordered to pay a huge 226 billion gold marks penalty for starting the war. It's the equivalent of $860 billion in today's money. That sum is made even harder to stomach by a massive reduction of territory. 13% of Germany's territory is lost. 6 million Germans lose their citizenship and are forced to become part of new countries like Czechoslovakia and Poland. 1/5 of German industry is taken over by the Allies.
And here they were being truncated, being damaged, and being deprived of a large section of the population. So that, added to the shame of defeat, meant that Germany, the people themselves, individually felt a very deep sense of pain.
Hitler's anger grows. The former star of Europe and rising industrial powerhouse has been crippled. In Germany, most people just breathe deeply and try to get on with life. A new democratic government takes shape. It is called the Weimar Republic and is named after the German city where it was founded. Created in August 1919, it is designed to replace the autocratic, militaristic rule of the Kaiser and his generals. Hitler regards the Weimar Republic as an abomination. To him, it is weak, dominated by the very same Jewish and liberal politicians who had stabbed Germany in the back and surrendered in World War I. But at this stage, he can do nothing about it. He has no connections with politics at all. Then an unlikely job offer comes along.
The one body that's going to give Hitler any chance of employment is the army, in which he's still technically serving. And one day he's approached by a man called Karl Mayer, who is the officer in charge of the kind of the Bavarian army's information department.
Mayer sees something in Hitler. He gives him the job of spying on the numerous new political parties that meet in the city's beer halls and cellars.
beer halls are an essential part of southern German political activity.
These beer halls would become political forums. Nationalists would go round them and give speeches. So would socialists.
Mayer sends him to observe a fringe right-wing group, the grandly named German Workers' Party.
This was basically two blokes and a ferret.
It was amateur hour. It was yet another one of these very small, noxious, febrile, anti-Semitic, angry groups of men meeting in beer halls and venting their spleen. At that time, it was nothing special.
In the autumn of 1919, Hitler attends their meetings, taking notes for Mayer. What he hears begins to inspire him.
But it just so happened on that night, something snapped, something spoke to him.
He likes the party's communist-bashing rhetoric, and the hatred of the Jews, and the socialists.
And rather simply observe and report back, he then joins in.
He is quickly noticed by the party leader, Anton Drexler.
Drexler said, "What's your name?" And he said, "My name's Adolf Hitler." He said, "Would you be interested in joining this party?"
Adolf Hitler's journey into politics has begun. Quickly, he is made propaganda chief. He begins to dominate the small leadership committee of 7 that meet.
And within a very short time, people like Anton Drexler realise this is the man. We can't do without him. This is the man who's going to carry us forward.
It was very much about Hitler seizing the moment in those Munich beer halls, jumping onto tables and giving impassioned, impromptu speeches which carried people along.
So he dominates in a way that his colleagues in the war would have been astounded at. The leadership he shows, the skill, the ability to steer things his way, remarkable.
In Munich, Hitler develops what will become the foundation of the Nazi Party's ideology, a 25-point manifesto.
The 25 points remained sacrosanct all the way through. This was what we were rallying around if we were Nazis.
They're like tablets of stone. They're like something out of the Bible. They're like commandments.
It was against unfettered capitalism. It was against Jews. It was against anarchy. It was against Bolshevism.
Foreign policy goals were simple: to seize back all the lands the Allies had taken at the Treaty of Versailles, and an end to reparations, the crippling payments for the war demanded by the Allied powers.
Hitler's great achievement, his genius, I think one is fair to say, was to know what simple ideas to put across.
Alongside his new manifesto, he gave the party a new name and a new emblem. A blood-red flag with the swastika at its heart.
One of Hitler's great elements of his political genius is to recognise the power of iconography.
The visceral image of black on red really does have a powerful impact on the psyche. There is some genius in the simplicity of its message.
The flag becomes the calling card for the new party. It incorporated the colours of the old German Empire with the ancient Aryan image of the swastika.
So its colours were a nod to the past, but its symbol felt modern.
It plays, of course, on the tradition of the Christian cross. Germany still at this point is an incredibly religious society.
It's a very brutal, simple brand. From its beginning, it was a rallying brand.
It's a clear symbol with bright colours, and it did look good on flags, and it did look good when they marched down the streets. So he'd given them a clear identification.
Along with the emblem comes a new title: the National Socialist Workers' Party, or Nazis. The Nazi Party is born.
Hitler tried to fuse the two forces of socialism, which obviously had an enormous appeal to the German working class, and nationalism together in one.
By 1921, Hitler becomes leader of the Nazis. At this stage, his new movement does not believe in democracy. He wants to seize power by force. This approach resonates with a new man in the audience at party meetings, a man who will help him take the Nazis to their greatest heights. Hermann Göring.
Göring is misfit number 2. Göring is obviously sympathetic to all these rightist ideas, and obviously in the Munich of the early 20s, there's one man who's starting to dominate this political scene, and that's Adolf Hitler.
Göring, like Hitler, is a veteran of World War I. But unlike Hitler, his war record is the stuff of legend.
He was a star. He was well known. He was a flamboyant character. In those early days, he hadn't yet become the caricature fat man that we are so familiar with today. He was lean and mean and handsome.
At first, he served as an infantryman. But then he becomes a pilot and commands not just any squadron, but the most famous of the war, the Red Baron's Flying Circus. He shoots down 22 enemy aircraft and even wins the German Empire's highest award for gallantry, the Blue Max Medal. Then, in the dying days of World War I, the war hero is beaten up by a leftist gang. It is something that will mark him forever. The humiliation gets worse after the war. He is unemployed, spending his days hunting for a job. Like Hitler, he becomes appalled at the state Germany now finds itself in. The former air ace is eventually forced to make a living on the road as a comedy stunt pilot, performing aerobatics.
And then one Monday night, he turns up and sees Hitler talk, and Göring's just blown away. And he says, finally, I've come across someone who's got a clear and definite aim. And suddenly it's this kind of moment of epiphany for Göring. This is the man.
A day after first seeing Hitler talk, the two men who will become the most powerful Nazis in history meet. Hitler signs Göring up straight away, recruiting him into the party.
When Hitler and Göring met, there was a really good fit. What Göring represented to Hitler was a kind of war hero he had always been looking for.
As for Göring, he doesn't buy into all Hitler's policies, but he is seduced by the prospect of power.
A shrewd, self-regarding individual who sees in the politics of the Nazi Party a means of self-promotion.
Together, they start to bring the fledgling Nazi Party out of the shadows and into public life. Hitler starts to move into the open, but on a very small scale. He refines his oratory skills in the beer cellars and halls of Munich.
Hitler emerges very, very quickly. He basically knows how to whip up a crowd, he can read a crowd, he's very sensitive to the mood of crowds. He knows when to be quiet, he knows when to be loud, he knows how to manipulate, he knows what the crowd wants to hear. He gives them what they want.
But rabble-rousing is not the only way he will get his message across. In December 1920, he buys a weekly paper, the Völkischer Beobachter.
He begins to realize that he needs to operate on a bigger scale. He purchases the shares in the Völkischer Beobachter, where the effective use of big headlines, attention-grabbing content and images is combined to forge the image of a party which is simultaneously reactionary in content but incredibly modern.
And this illustrates, I think, the Nazis' way of using every form of modern media communication before other parties actually latched onto it.
The paper now becomes a major tool in pushing the Nazi message to a wider public. Circulation rises from 8,000 to 25,000 readers. But the Nazis are still only a small fringe organization. If they are to fulfill Hitler's plan of seizing power by force, they need more than newspapers. They need muscle.
He's conscious on the streets in disturbed Germany, you need the heavy mob.
We've got to remember that politics in Germany at that time was violent, very much militarized.
Enter the SA, the Sturmabteilung, Hitler's brown-shirted heavies.
The SA are very much the anti-intellectual movement of the Nazi Party. They are disaffected people who have fallen through the cracks of the Weimar system. A lot of them are young men who are unemployed and for whom the promise of Weimar capitalism hasn't really come true.
The recruiting message is simple.
Come and join a cause. We'll give you a uniform. We'll let you bash heads. We'll let you kick communists and Jews. You'll have a whale of a time, lads. And we'll provide the beer as well.
The uniformed SA get involved in street brawls. They eject hecklers from meetings. They intimidate opponents, but they are also ill-disciplined. Now Hitler has the perfect role for his trusted ally, Hermann Göring. In 1923, he is put in charge of the SA. The former war hero soon knocks the brown shirts into shape. Hitler would later state,
I gave him a disheveled rabble. In a very short time, he had organized a division of 11,000 men.
By now, Nazi Party membership is still small, but expanding to 14,000 members from the 2,000 Hitler started with. For the first time, there are offices outside Munich as the party expands its base. Then member number 14,303 signs up, Heinrich Himmler, who joins the party in the summer of 1923. Himmler is an altogether less impressive character than Göring and Hitler. He presents himself as a heroic figure, a dashing fencer and officer cadet. But in truth, he is anything but. He is a former chicken farmer who studies agronomy at Munich University. His hobbies include diary writing and stamp collecting.
One of the things that drives Himmler is the fact that he's a bit younger and he hasn't properly served in the war. He's born in 1900, and towards the end of the war, he's only in a training battalion. And so he never actually sees service on the front, and this really annoys him.
When he comes out of the war, almost ashamed that he hadn't done more. His life is sad, to put it in short terms. He seemed to be looking for a cause, something he could relate to, something he could put his great energies into.
Himmler is drawn by Hitler's populist message and right-wing beliefs. But he is also driven by his personal loathing of the Jews.
In his diary, which has survived, we see him talking about the Jewish question all the way through from about 1918 to 1922, and he talks about the Jews as the scourge of humanity. They have to be removed from society. So he's very strong on the anti-Semitic policy of the Nazis. And of course, Himmler goes on to be the leader of the SS, which eventually plans the final solution.
At first, Himmler remains on the margins of the Nazi Party, in a paramilitary group loosely connected to Hitler. There are few indications that he will become the most murderous and feared Jew-hater of them all. Nevertheless, the three major Nazi players, the three misfits, who would shape the Nazi Party's future, are now in place. All they need is an opportunity to strike. Now events conspire to help them. Germany plunges into economic disaster. Hyperinflation is gripping the economy. Grotesque mismanagement of the nation's finances means that a loaf of bread rises from 165 marks to over 1 billion in the space of 10 months. For ordinary Germans on fixed wages, that's an unimaginable increase.
It is the workers who suffer most. He can buy less, his wife in the shops can buy less, his children have less. So for the working class, it was a deeply disillusioning time.
A pound of meat rises to 9 billion marks, a beer to 52 billion. The middle classes were also affected. Those who had been carefully saving for a secure future saw their hopes ruined.
The tragedy for the middle class was that most of them had invested, were still investing, in pensions, and they found that these were almost wiped out within 2 or 3 days, given the pace of inflation. So the stability the middle class buy into through their pensions and their income and their investments, that was shattered. So the middle class feel their moorings of their lives are being taken away from them.
Once more, unrest returns to Germany's streets. For the Weimar government, it's a disaster. Germany defaults on its reparations payments to the Allies. In lieu of payment, French and Belgian troops seize the only asset Germany has. They occupy the Ruhr, the industrial heartland of the country.
The Ruhr was the main centre of industrial activity in post-war Germany. And for that to be occupied by the French was a shattering blow. They actually took away the basis of their economy for that period.
Foreign troops' boots are on German sovereign territory.
There's nothing worse for a proud people than to be occupied. It reminded them of just how vulnerable they were to the vindictiveness of the Allies.
These allies are determined to hold back the German economy. They're taking our money. They want total humiliation from the German people. So this was a rallying call, if you like, for nationalism.
In Munich, Hitler has now risen to head of the Bavarian Kampfbund, a loose affiliation of fellow right-wing revolutionaries.
The so-called Combat League, a set of disparate nationalist militarist groups in the early 20s.
The group is united by one thing: the Weimar Republic must go.
Hitler thinks this is his moment. There's chaos. This is the perfect time for our battle group to actually seize control.
The only question is how. The inspiration comes from abroad. Europe's most successful fascist, Benito Mussolini, storms to power in Italy just months before, in October 1922. He has acquired huge popular support and marches on Rome with his 30,000 black shirts.
Mussolini gets this band of fascist supporters. They then march through the streets. They go to the palace of the king, and then Mussolini takes power. So this is a very romantic notion of how you can overthrow a major government and take power.
Mussolini and Hitler had many parallels. Like Hitler, he was a former soldier. He had also been wounded. Like Hitler, Mussolini, a former journalist, understands the power of the press. And while Mussolini has his black shirts, Hitler has his brown shirts.
Hitler hears about this and he thinks, this sounds like a good idea. We could do this here. We could take power in Munich and then march to Berlin. And as we go to Berlin, we can get all the people who want to get rid of the old democratic government and overthrow it. That's the idea. So the plot starts to hatch. It hatches in little secretive meetings and dinners.
The first challenge is who to lead the revolt. Hitler is well aware he is too unknown to unite the whole of Germany. He needs a figurehead. He has a suitable person in mind. General Erich Ludendorff, national hero of the German right and one of the great commanders of World War I.
So Ludendorff had this military position which was highly attractive to the Nazis. They were so pleased he joined their cause. He pressed all the right buttons, we might say.
In many ways, you can see Ludendorff as the kind of titular head, the kind of symbolic head of this movement, and whereas Hitler is often referred to as the drummer. He's the one beating on the march. He's the one who's making it go, and it's Ludendorff at its head. And that's kind of how you should see the two roles. But Ludendorff is a very, very important figure.
Next, the plotters discuss the mechanics of how to seize power.
The aim is to challenge the Bavarian government in Munich as the first step towards challenging the government of Germany overall.
First, Hitler will hijack a major political meeting of the leaders of Bavaria. Present will be the state prime minister, Gustav von Kahr. He would force von Kahr and the leaders of the state police and military to join the coup. Ludendorff would be critical in persuading the three men to come on side.
If someone as senior and as distinguished as Ludendorff supported the Nazis and Hitler, then that gave Hitler enormous prestige.
With von Kahr and the two others on his side, Hitler believes he can get the army and police to join the revolt. Simultaneously, units, including Himmler's SA group, will take control of the key military and police buildings in Munich. The date is finally set. Hitler makes his way to a public meeting at Munich's massive Bürgerbraukeller.
It starts on the evening of the 8th of November at around 8:15 when Hitler turns up in a red Mercedes at the Bürgerbraukeller in Munich.
Inside, Gustav von Kahr is addressing the crowd. With him are the two chiefs of the Bavarian police and army.
So all the three triumvirate men who were running Bavaria at that time were in this one beer hall at the same time.
He decided to go to the Bürgerbraukeller and to seize the initiative at the meeting and to pin von Kahr down and the triumvirate to backing the revolution.
All across Munich, SA activists get the call to don their uniforms and head to assembly points around the city to be issued with rifles. Soon, SA men armed with rifles and steel helmets arrive at the beer hall by truck. Together with 600 SA men, Hitler storms the 3,000-strong meeting.
Hitler is very theatrical. He then marches up to the stage with a pistol in his hand.
He declares,
"The national revolution has broken out."
only it hadn't. The leader of the revolution, Ludendorff, wasn't even there. He was late. Hitler now takes the three state leaders into a back room and desperately tries to convince them himself to join the coup.
But of course, the Bavarian triumvirate weren't ready or prepared to allow this gutter-snipe orator to take over.
As Hitler argues, Nazi sympathizers and brown shirts, including Himmler, continue moving in on military buildings around the city. Hitler has to turn the situation around.
Hitler needs these people on side if he's going to succeed.
Pistol in hand, he threatens to kill them. they won't budge.
You then have hours of these negotiations going on in which the Bavarian politicians are very reluctant to join Hitler, but Hitler desperately needs them on side. He realises actually, even though he's got a pistol as a negotiating tool, it can't really be fired at these people. That's not going to work.
So he storms back into the main hall of the Bürgerbraukeller to address the crowd. In a desperate speech, he tries everything to win their support.
When he makes his impassioned speech in the beer cellar and says, the government is willing to give way to us. They're willing for us to form the next government. They weren't. They hadn't agreed to it. But he claimed that was the case, and he said, outside, the army and the police have come to our side. They hadn't. But they cheer and clap and bawl with delight.
Finally, Ludendorff arrives. The mood is electric. With Ludendorff in the room, the three leaders of Bavaria agree to join the coup.
Eventually, after quite a lot of dithering and toing and froing, they agree.
Meanwhile, across Munich, SA units, including Himmler's outfit, have set up barricades and surrounded the army and police buildings. Some army and police units even agree to join the uprising. It seems the coup really might work. But at other army barracks, soldiers refuse to side with the Nazis. With the coup in the balance, everything depends on what Adolf Hitler does next.
He then leaves, Hitler, he leaves the hall, leaving Ludendorff to keep control of things.
As Hitler heads across the city to check on the progress of his putsch, Ludendorff allows the Bavarian leaders to go.
Ludendorff very unwisely accepted the word of von Kahr and his two military and police cohorts that they would be good boys and support the putsch, and let them go.
Instead, von Kahr rallies troops against Hitler.
Kahr goes back on his word and says, no, I'm here to control things.
Hitler now returns to the beer hall and makes a critical error. Rather than go out and try to win over more army and police units, he waits, convinced they will come on side anyway. He remains there, passive, for several hours.
They stay in the beer cellar for some time, hoping that those outside will come around to their way of thinking. By then, people have sobered up, and it's never quite the same.
Meanwhile, as Hitler dithers, in Berlin, news of the putsch reaches the government. It immediately issues a proclamation declaring Hitler and his supporters guilty of high treason.
It was high treason. You've got to remember that. To engage in treason, attacking a sitting government, was no small beer.
The conspirators back in Munich are now all staring at the death penalty. But it is Ludendorff who takes charge.
And at one point you have Ludendorff in this fantastic Prussian way. He goes, "Wir marschieren, we will march."
Finally, with 2,000 men, including Ludendorff and Göring at his side, the Nazis march on central Munich. But the authorities are waiting for them and have prepared defenses. It is the moment of truth. "16 Nazis are killed. Göring is among the wounded." In later years, the official Nazi account would tell a very heroic version of these events. Few mentioned the 4 dead policemen. Nor did people dwell on how Hitler and Himmler fled the field of battle.
Hitler escapes in an ambulance, runs away from the scene of the crime, if you like. Not really that heroic when you look at it. And he ends up being arrested a couple of days later. And then, of course, he's put on trial for high treason. So really, why it's called the Beer Hall Putsch is that Hitler, for a little bit, took over a beer hall.
It was very clear that Hitler didn't really know what to do. And of course, you know, in later retellings by the Nazi Party, this was a very definite, prearranged, purposeful night. But of course, it was just a muddle. It was a muddle by amateur revolutionaries who really didn't have the means or the ability to actually mount a proper coup.
And so, the putsch becomes a cause for celebration in Nazi mythology, and an annual act of remembrance in the Nazi calendar.
And he erected these enormous shrines to them right in the heart of Munich, very close to where they had been shot down. And on the anniversary of the putsch, each year on November the 9th, the Nazi leaders, getting steadily more portly, dressed themselves in their old brown uniforms that they'd worn at the time of the putsch, Göring and Hitler in the front rank of the marchers, and would parade through the streets of Munich, and this became a piece of theatre to the muffled drum rolls. No one was allowed to speak. There was just total silence as the Nazi leadership paraded through and reenacted the putsch. Each year they did this, and they continued to do this right up until 1939, when a lone would-be assassin, a left-wing worker called Georg Elser, detonated a bomb in the beer hall where the putsch had started, almost wrecking it, and after that the marches were discontinued.
But back in 1924, it seems as if it is all over for Adolf Hitler. He is arrested. His Nazi party is disbanded for starting a coup. His newspaper, the Völkischer Beobachter, is also banned. Nevertheless, even though he seems to be facing disaster, Hitler has learned a crucial lesson that will ultimately carry him to power. Being on the fringe of politics won't work. Most people don't support parties that try to seize power through force. If he wants to fulfill his destiny and become the leader of Germany, he will have to find another way.
The main lesson that Hitler learnt from the putsch was that violence doesn't work, especially unsuccessful violence.
He realised that if he was going to come to power, he'd have to do so legally.
You do it constitutionally by using the electoral system. We'll carry people with us. We don't need a majority even. We just need to be dominant in our thinking.
So, even though Hitler's coup looks like a total failure, in fact, the rise of the Nazis is only just beginning. In the winter of 1923, Adolf Hitler is at an all-time low. His audacious attempt to seize power in a coup has been an embarrassing failure, and he's going to jail. His Nazi party, seen only as a band of fringe revolutionaries, is on the verge of being shut down. But Hitler has a plan. He's going to take the Nazis into the mainstream of politics.
He wanted to become a respectable parliamentarian without being any of those things.
Purpose, love of the nation, nationalism, that'll take us through. That will carry the day. And it does.
This is the story of how Hitler's reinvention of the Nazi Party and a financial catastrophe opened the door for him to win the hearts and minds of the German nation. Adolf Hitler is led into court to stand trial for high treason. 4 months before, Hitler and his National Socialist Party had attempted to overthrow the German Weimar government in Munich. But they had failed. The Beer Hall Putsch is a humiliating setback for the Nazis and a personal blow for Hitler.
Remarkably, just before the trial began, he was visited by some colleagues, and they found him so depressed he was actually contemplating suicide. Whether that was a bluff, we're not sure, but he told them he felt so low.
Hitler is absolutely despondent. It basically has been a disaster, and he knows it. And he thinks that this is the end of his career. And then something very strange happens.
Incredibly, even in the moment of total catastrophe, Hitler is already plotting a comeback.
In court, he realizes this is an opportunity. This isn't going to be the kind of end of Hitler. This is going to be the making of a new Hitler. You can't imagine actually a better theatre for Hitler outside a beer hall.
Hitler had been expected to deny his part in the plot. But instead, he openly admits his guilt.
I alone bear the responsibility. But I'm not a criminal because of that. If today I stand here as a revolutionary, it is as a revolutionary against the revolution. There is no such thing as high treason against the traitors of 1918.
In a series of speeches, he lays out his case. First, he targets the Treaty of Versailles signed at the end of the First World War, which has left Germany financially crippled. He's outraged that Germany has been forced to pay huge sums to the Allies for starting the war, leaving its people starving and impoverished.
For us, it was a filthy crime against the German people. A stab in the back for the German nation.
Hitler personified a widespread belief. Hitler was tapping into a very, very strong German national trope. They felt that Germany had got a bum deal at Versailles.
He's disgusted by the seizure of Germany's richest industrial territory, the Ruhr, by the Allies. And he blames the left-wing German politicians who, he says, surrendered pathetically in 1918. His impassioned speeches strike a chord. Instead of being a traitor, he portrays himself as a patriot trying to restore the nation's honor.
The idea of the victim status of Germany, the idea the Allies are at fault in imposing Versailles upon them, and the fact that Weimar itself, the government, is at fault in giving in to so many demands from outside and not having the capacity to lead Germany correctly. He's got quite a degree of sympathy going for him.
But Hitler also states something else. The leadership of Germany, he proclaims, is his destiny.
The man who feels called upon to govern a people has no right to say, if you want me or summon me, I will cooperate. No! It is his duty to step forward. The man who is born to be a dictator is not compelled. He wills it.
Hitler's performances are so mesmeric, they make news not only across Germany, but around the globe. In Britain, The Daily Express names Hitler Bavaria's uncrowned king and a tub-thumping patriot who, it suggests, may be heard from again someday. But Hitler still has to convince one person at his trial: the judge. After 4 weeks in court, he reaches his verdict.
For leading an attempted coup against the state, Hitler gets the grand total of a 5-year sentence, which is incredibly short. He's lucky, actually, to not got a death sentence.
Hitler's interned 40 miles west of Munich in the picturesque town of Landsberg. And he's treated like royalty in exile. With his newfound celebrity status, Hitler uses his prison stay as a PR opportunity, inviting his own photographer to record his incarceration. It's just one of a number of privileges he's given behind bars.
Hitler would later make out that his time in Landsberg prison was pretty hellish, but in fact the truth was quite the opposite.
He can walk around the gardens as and when he likes. Some of his cronies are allowed to come in and out and visit him. This isn't a prison, this is a kind of nationalist holiday camp.
It was very comfortable. He had his own favourite wicker chair. He had windows to look out of. And he actually grew quite porky. He ate quite a lot of meat. He drank quite a lot of alcohol.
He has 3-course meals that are brought in. Parties even go on inside his quarters.
He was able to fraternise with friends. And he was able to listen to music.
Hitler's music of choice is Wagner.
He had access to a wind-up gramophone. The old large 78s would be at his disposal.
He adored Wagner, and even as a teenager, he would spend his last groschen, his last shillings, on going to the opera in Vienna and listening to Wagner operas.
For the Austrian-born Hitler, Wagner embodies everything he loves about his adopted country, Germany.
It's the nature of the music that took Hitler. The grandness of the music, the sheer expansion of it, the themes themselves, taking on the gods of the great traditions of German culture. It's grand, it's ambitious, it's hugely confident. He saw in Wagner inspirational content.
Stirred by this sense of nationalism, and by the works of an array of philosophers he spends hours absorbing, Hitler decides to set down on paper his own beliefs.
If you're going to be a National Socialist Party, you're competing with the Communist Party, and they have a book on which they base their ideas, which is Das Kapital by Karl Marx. So he decides that the Nazi Party needs a philosophical tract where he can outline the ideology of the party.
Imprisoned with him at Landsberg is one of Hitler's co-conspirators from the Beer Hall Putsch, Rudolf Hess. Now acting as his private secretary, Hess takes dictation from Hitler day after day as he embarks on the book which will define Nazism. My Struggle, or Mein Kampf, is supposed to be a deep, personal statement from Hitler.
It's the man talking about himself and his ideas for the first time in a systematic way. And that's why it's so significant.
Distorted tales about Hitler's childhood, his early youth in Vienna, and his war experiences. are mixed together with political and racial theorizing. But the concepts within it aren't his own.
Mein Kampf really is based on a number of ideas that he's heard. It's kind of a melting pot of ideas robbed from philosophy, taken from, you know, the back of a beer mat. Really, it's a kind of mishmash.
At its heart is Hitler's belief that the Aryan German people are the natural master race, and that Germany's biggest enemy are the Jews.
The personification of the devil, as the symbol of all evil, assumes the living shape of the Jew.
Hitler believes that the Jews are a genetically inferior race, and that they're to blame for everything that's wrong with Germany, including the country's capitulation in the First World War and its economic plight.
He is and remains the typical parasite, a sponger who, like a noxious bacillus, keeps spreading as soon as a favorable medium invites him.
On top of this, he blames them for communism.
In Bolshevism, we must see the attempt undertaken by the Jews in the 20th century to achieve world domination. He goes his way, the way of sneaking in among the nations and boring from within, with lies and slander, poison and corruption.
Mein Kampf even contains a frightening warning about Hitler's intentions.
The whole text is shot through with incredibly violent language. Page after page, we get the language of eradication, annihilation, destruction, extermination. Hitler believes the only way to solve the Jewish problem is to destroy the Jewish parasite. There can be no doubt that if Hitler comes to power, there is going to be some kind of a reckoning with the Jews.
Hitler's next key policy is inspired by a Munich University lecturer in political geography and a former tutor to Rudolf Hess, Dr. Karl Haushofer. During a visit to Landsberg prison, Haushofer introduces Hitler to the concept of Lebensraum, literally, living room.
Implicit within Lebensraum is this idea of territorial acquisition. Karl Haushofer believes that Germany is overpopulated, and he says that the only way for Germany to break out from its density of population is to get living space, Lebensraum.
Lebensraum gives Hitler the idea that in order for the nation to become a great power, Germany must invade other countries, particularly those populated with the races he deems inferior.
That would imply, wouldn't it, that Germany needed to gain territory from other countries and, of course, take over Poland and the Soviet Union.
Now, Hitler's thoughts on the Treaty of Versailles, the destruction of the Jews, communism, German supremacy, and headlong expansion have been crystallized for public consumption. Mein Kampf will serve as the blueprint of the Third Reich and Hitler's dream of a new order. All he has to do is take it to the German people. After serving just 9 months of a 5-year sentence, the 35-year-old Hitler prepares himself for his release. Despite being sent to jail for trying to overthrow the German Weimar government, in the year since his failed coup in Munich, he's transformed himself from violent revolutionary to national hero. But the wave of popularity doesn't last. While in private, Hitler had been preparing his Bible for Nazism. Outside prison, he's been practically forgotten. And if he expected a horde of well-wishers at the gates, he doesn't get them. Instead, there's only a car to meet him. The reason? Germany is booming. The democratic government has borrowed billions from overseas to pay its war debts. Now the country's growing fat on foreign money, particularly from the United States.
The mid-1920s are very much the golden years of the Weimar Republic.
The Americans give them a vast range of loans, and because of this, Germany revives. The German economy improves dramatically enough for the Weimar democratic government to look like it's starting to work.
At last, it seems like the days of suffering are over.
It's very much seen as a period of new beginning. After the turbulence of the hyperinflation, things are looking up. People are broadly happy with the political system as long as it delivers the goods, as long as it delivers growth and stability.
But for Hitler, all this prosperity is disastrous. No one wants to hear from a radical revolutionary party, particularly one that wants to seize power by force. Worse still, as punishment for the Beer Hall Putsch, Hitler's been banned from public speaking. There's even talk of deporting him back to his native Austria. And that isn't the end of the bad news. The Nazi Party's in a state of collapse. Hitler's trusted friend and right-hand man, the war hero, Hermann Göring, who had stood by his side during the Beer Hall Putsch, has become hooked on drugs. Shot and wounded in the leg during the putsch, he'd escaped capture, but hospitalized in Austria, he's become reliant on morphine.
It left him with recurrent pain when he had a couple of operations. During one of the operations, he was given morphine for the pain. He becomes addicted.
He was getting supplies of it from his doctor surreptitiously, and he was injecting morphine and becoming more and more addicted to it.
Things are so bad that in the coming months, Göring will be committed to a mental asylum.
He became so twitchy and violent. They had to restrain him, and he was put in a straitjacket for some weeks because he was in such a state. He got over it, but his morphine addiction remains.
Meanwhile, the party newspaper is closed down by order of the state. Nazi Party membership that had reached 55,000 in 1923 now collapses by more than half. And in the elections of December 1924, the Nazis are routed, taking just 3% of the vote. The party's been hit hard by Hitler's absence and by a sea change in public opinion.
It was a natural decline, really. If the man who made the party what it was, if he's not there, it's bound to go to some decline. Then if we add to that the economic recovery, then Nazism didn't have that strong appeal that it had prior to the putsch.
Even more humiliating, when Mein Kampf, Hitler's autobiographical manifesto, is published, it's a commercial flop. It sells only 10,000 copies. Not even every Nazi buys one. For Hitler, this is a crisis moment. His party's on the verge of extinction. If he's to turn things around, something's going to have to change.
Hitler made the decision that from here on the Nazis must no longer be a revolutionary, violent party. They must adopt the forms of legalism. They must stand in elections. They must go through the motions of being a democratic parliamentary party.
Hitler decrees that the Nazi Party will be relaunched. It will be reputable and democratic, seeking power not through violence, but by winning seats in the German parliament, the Reichstag.
He didn't resile at all his view that Parliament was a nest of fools and traitors, that democracy was a ridiculous facade manipulated by the Jews and the communists, but he would go through the motions because he saw the putsch and violence had been an abject failure. He wanted to put on the garb, the mantle, the coat of respectability and become, at least on the surface, a respectable parliamentarian without being any of those things.
Behind closed doors, Hitler tells his inner circle.
We shall have to hold our noses and enter the Reichstag. If outvoting them takes longer than outshooting them, at least the results will be guaranteed by their own constitution. Sooner or later, we shall have majority. And after that, we shall have Germany.
Now Hitler starts to develop the tactics that will ultimately propel his party to power. Outwardly, he and the Nazis will present a veneer of respectability, while inwardly sticking to their violent and extremist plans.
They've got to look like they are working within the political system and that they are a real and credible political party and not just a bunch of lunatics who try to seize beer halls in Munich.
With Germany now seemingly prosperous under a democratic government, Hitler realizes that the only way he can take power is to win the hearts and minds of the German people in an election. To kick off their charm offensive, the Nazi Party needs an image overhaul. And it begins with Hitler himself. For help, he turns to his Lebensraum guru, Dr. Karl Haushofer.
He was a major influence, not simply in ideas, but in technique of presentation. This notion that presentation is everything in politics.
Haushofer helps to construct a series of new looks for Hitler to make him appeal to as many people across Germany as possible.
He can either present the kind of traditional German folkish figure in lederhosen and the long socks and the walking shoes, and that appeals to a certain element of the community. He can also look much more technocratic, and he can wear a very smart lounge suit. And if he's at a great Nazi rally, he's in his uniform.
But it's not only his appearance that Hitler wants to improve. To keep his head clear and his voice protected after long speeches, Haushofer replaces Hitler's steins of strong Bavarian beer with cups of herbal tea. But most importantly, he trains Hitler in the art of public speaking, teaching him ways to gesticulate, to emphasize his arguments, and increase his self-confidence.
The idea of how to deliver a speech. To whom are you speaking? Adjust your tone, your manner, your style to the audience, and then you'll win them over.
He starts to practice in front of the mirror. He practices some of his gesticulations in front of the mirror.
His gesture, that famous one with the hand going back, and when to pause in a speech.
He has a series of photographs taken so that he can see which gesticulations work best in his speeches. So he's really into the idea of image.
It's easy to poo-poo that and think that this is a vain and self-obsessed thing to do, which of course Hitler was. But at the same time, it makes total sense. If oratory is one of your hallmarks, you've got to get it right. So why not practice in front of the mirror?
With a new, glossy image, Hitler now needs someone to sell it. He's already found the perfect person. Failed writer, Joseph Goebbels.
It's hard to imagine a less perfect form of Nordic Superman than Joseph Goebbels. If anybody doesn't look like a Nazi, it's Goebbels. He's short, he's slight, he's physically imperfect because he's got a club foot, and he's also really quite ugly. But what he has is a very quick mind. He's a PhD in philology, and he recognises the power of propaganda and words.
With hang-ups about his height, his disability, and his rejection from the German army because of it, he also despises the Weimar government.
Goebbels' feelings about the Weimar Republic can be easily summed up. He detested it, he loathed it from the bottom of his heart. He thought it was a corrupt, decadent parliamentary system.
He came from a very poor Catholic background, but he'd fallen out with the Catholic Church. He was a man of great intelligence and talent, but in search of a direction. And his early direction was nationalist, but towards the left of the Nazi party.
Despite being more left-leaning in his politics, Goebbels shares Hitler's anti-Semitic beliefs.
He really did hate Jews. He hated people who didn't conform. Arguably, he is the most unpleasant of all the Nazis. But in terms of his vindictiveness and his hatreds, very, very sharp.
But keen to attract the attentions of Hitler, it's his gift for flattery that first gets him noticed. In a letter prompted by Hitler's speeches during his trial for the Beer Hall Putsch, Goebbels had written,
"Like a rising star, you appeared before our wondering eyes. You performed miracles to clear our minds and, in a world of skepticism and desperation, gave us faith. You named the need of a whole generation. One day Germany will thank you."
Almost overnight, Goebbels was changed. Here was a man he thought he could identify with. He threw himself into politics locally, working for the Nazi party in the Rhineland, where he lived. And intriguingly, he developed an adulation of this man whom he had never met and did not know in person. It was not, in fact, for another 15 months that he met Hitler for the first time in the summer of 1925. And then he said, he's everything I had hoped for. He's all that he had hoped for and more.
Once he came under Hitler's spell, he developed a schoolgirl crush on this man.
In an entry in his diary on the 23rd of November 1925, Goebbels writes,
"Great joy. He greets me like an old friend. How I love him. What a fellow. Then he speaks. How small I am. He gives me his photograph with a greeting to the Rhineland. Heil Hitler. I want Hitler to be my friend."
Goebbels is so taken by Hitler, he quickly abandons his leftist interests. In order to rebrand the entire Nazi party, Hitler recognizes he needs the help of a man like Goebbels.
A lot of the Nazi party regarded Goebbels as the truly brilliant one amongst the Nazis. He was very quick-witted. He doesn't have this lumpen, cliched Prussian German way of doing things by the book.
He's also enormously hardworking. He's a tremendously energetic man, ready to work long, long hours, to travel incessantly.
He's a much more resourceful figure. If there's a problem, Goebbels will be very good at fixing it. Goebbels will be the man to go to.
With restrictions still placed on the party in many places across Germany, Hitler needs someone who can attract new voters.
Goebbels was a man who understood intuitively modern methods of propaganda.
We see a shift towards the print media by necessity because Hitler's prevented from giving those public speeches, but that then sets the tone for very much. A whole range of Nazi newspapers, Nazi magazines emerge. The Nazis are right there leading from the front when it comes to the pioneering use on leaflets, in illustrated papers, on election posters.
Hitler's so impressed by Goebbels, in November 1926, he hands him the important role of taking the Nazi Party message to the nation's capital, Berlin.
Goebbels came to Berlin in 1926 as an outsider. He didn't know the city. And importantly, this was not a city in which the Nazis were strong. Berlin had a reputation then as a communist stronghold, a trade unionist stronghold, and Goebbels therefore was tasked by Hitler with a very difficult mission.
Berlin always left-wing in sympathies. The eastern side of the city certainly to a large degree controlled by the communists, and it became Goebbels' job to win Red Berlin for the Nazis and to wean it away from communism.
Goebbels has lorries scatter leaflets through the city streets, pastes the city walls with red swastikas and posters, and uses his Berlin newspaper, Der Angriff, the attack, to feed Hitler's political ideology to the masses. But he also uses another great talent: speech-making. The ban on public speaking is lifted in 1927. Goebbels now becomes a regular speechmaker for the Nazis.
He himself was second only to Hitler in his oratory. Although a small, unimpressive man physically, he could electrify an audience with his passion and his oratory. So he was an extremely valuable man to have on Hitler's side.
Where Hitler's style is aggressive and passionate, Goebbels is sharp-tongued and sarcastic.
Goebbels thrived in a confrontational atmosphere. He was at his best in a smoky hall with his opponents present. His speeches were long, they were often erudite, but they were also witty and entertaining, and he had a particular ability to put down hecklers.
But behind the smart exterior, Goebbels is a thug. He and his Nazi Party bully boys, the SA Brown Shirts, regularly provoke the opposition parties with the aim of causing bloodshed.
Goebbels' SA specialised at going into working class areas of Berlin, holding speeches and events which they knew would rouse the ire of the left-leaning local paramilitaries. This could be guaranteed to cause a fight.
They battled it out literally in the streets, using koshes, using chair legs, using bottles and beer mugs. They even shot and stabbed each other on the street. Unhesitatingly, Goebbels used violence to achieve his end.
Following an early 1927 political rally and a brawl with communists, Goebbels writes in his diary,
A procession through town. Our brave lads hauled a Jew out of a bus. How I love these lads. We are creating uproar all over Berlin.
While Goebbels is busy sorting out the German capital, back in Munich, Hitler is working on the final touches to his image. He wants something that will set him apart. As the aspiring ruler of Germany, Hitler is looking to create his own special bodyguard. The obvious group to recruit from are the SA brown shirts, but they're seen as too thuggish. He needs something more elite, more presidential. Enter the Schutzstaffel, Hitler's new protection force, or SS. The SS are meant to be the ideal of German manhood. Membership is restricted only to those who can trace their Aryan ancestry back to the 18th century.
You could compare the SS to a kind of imperial guard from ancient Rome.
They were the tallest, the best, the fittest, and they were dressed in these immaculate black uniforms.
The distinctive uniforms which Hitler will eventually put them in are made by clothes designer and Nazi Party member Hugo Boss.
Nothing is more striking in Nazi propaganda than the outfit of the SS. Meant to be daunting, meant to be frightening.
You had to wear black boots. You had to have black breeches. And they also have this skull and crossbones emblem, the Totenkopf.
The Totenkopf is meant to symbolise strength and purpose, loyalty and commitment unto death.
With a fast-evolving party image, a powerful propaganda machine behind them, and the 1928 election on the horizon, at last Hitler can put his new-look Nazis to the test. The Nazi Party machinery has been revamped. Party membership has increased fourfold since 1925. Hitler is busy putting into practice the tactic of looking outwardly respectable while sticking firmly to his secret agenda. Traveling around the country, he gives dynamic speeches that reach out to the unemployed and frustrated working classes, while reassuring the wealthy that he's not an extremist. But there's precious little mention of his real agenda: the Jews.
Hitler tries to project the party as a kind of model of political respectability. He tries to tone down anti-Semitism.
Instead, he targets the rural working classes, where Jew baiting isn't an electoral issue.
There are no Jews in these local rural communities, so really they're more interested in agricultural prices, they're interested in the prices of their goods as they take them to market. They're not really interested in the Jewish question.
And there's another reason for the Nazis to play down their anti-Semitism.
Hitler wants to seek business support as well. Most of Germany's major businesses are still exporting and interchanging with people in other countries who are Jewish.
Hitler's central political thrust isn't racist, but economic. He warns that the country's booming economy is propped up by American money, which, if pulled out, will see Germany collapse.
The phrase that Hitler uses in some of his speeches is that Weimar is dancing on a volcano, and that really all of this prosperity is down to loans and eventually it will all collapse and Germany will go back into a terrible state of depression again for relying on these American loans.
But when the election results come in May 1928, it's a shock. The Nazis receive just 2.6% of the vote. The Communists, Hitler's main rivals, have gained 4 times more support. Hitler and his party have done worse than they did in the 1924 elections. The new image hasn't worked. It looks like the Nazi party's going nowhere.
They were still an extremist party on the fringe with a minuscule percentage of the vote. But you have to remember that Germany was still enjoying a spell in the economic sunshine.
Nazism was like a snowball. It flourished in cold, dark times, but you subject it to sunlight and it will melt. And if the economy is the sun, that's what will happen to Nazism. It'll only be strong in critical times. It's a party that depends on extreme conditions. It won't be strong when things are going well. And 28 is an interesting commentary, really, on that. The party couldn't make inroads.
In the aftermath of the election results, Joseph Goebbels writes in his diary,
"Inner depression. The necessary reaction to the last few weeks.
Hitler and his inner circle despair that they will ever gain power. It seems the legitimate route has failed. But an earth-shattering event changes everything. On the 24th of October 1929, the stock market in Wall Street crashes. As Hitler had predicted, American banks call in their loans in a frantic effort to save themselves.
When America ran into trouble, then it pulled in its horns, it stopped buying goods, it stopped loaning money, and every country suffers because they're all tied into this international system.
The Great Depression sees countless thriving businesses plunged into bankruptcy all over the world. In Germany, the effects are devastating. Without their US loans, banks collapse. Unemployment shoots up dramatically. In just 8 weeks, it rises from 3% to 26%.
Germany increases its unemployed by 6 million. And when you think that another 3 people are affected by an unemployed person in the house, that meant 24 million Germans were affected by the Wall Street crash.
Virtually no one escapes its effects. People who'd painstakingly built up their savings after the hyperinflation of the early 20s are hit hard.
The middle class were again faced with a renewal of the nightmare that they had seen around about 1923, when the huge inflation beggared them, actually wiped out their savings almost overnight.
Humiliation and misery is compounded by poverty and starvation as parents struggle to feed their children. Chaos returns as the German people increasingly lose confidence in the Weimar Republic.
Germany really is in a terrible state, and you can see that by what happens very quickly. It's the hunger, it's the poverty, it's the real desperation that comes to Germany out of that Wall Street crash that we see the seeds of the turn away from democracy and towards the Nazi Party.
One man had predicted this all along. Suddenly, people are seeing him differently. Adolf Hitler's no longer a radical extremist. He's a prophet.
What he said would happen has begun to happen. Who is to blame? Well, at our distance removed, we say, well, it's a matter of international finance. But to the Nazi, international finance was Jewish finance. This is a great plot, as Hitler sees it. We told you what was happening, and now here's the proof positive.
With the German nation in despair, at last Hitler has the real opportunity he's been waiting for. Crucially, many of those who've suffered most as a result of the Great Depression are those who had ignored Hitler and voted against him. Now they are ready to listen to his message. The Nazis are on the rise. In 1930, Germany is in the midst of the Great Depression. Factories are closing. Unemployment is at 4.5 million. People are starving. Chaos has returned to the streets. One man has predicted this all along. Adolf Hitler, the one-time jailbird, looks like a prophet. And he says there's only one solution. Put him in charge. But do the German people really know what they're getting? This is the story of how Adolf Hitler subverts the democratic process and finally seizes power in Germany. As Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party prepare themselves for the 1930 general election in September, Germany is in economic meltdown. Hitler blames it on the democratic Weimar government imposed on Germany after the First World War. He'd warned about the dangers of relying on American loans before the Wall Street crash. Now the loans have been called in. The country's in a desperate situation. And all the government can offer is austerity.
The policy is cuts, 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 and more cuts. And this depresses the economy and makes things worse and increases the unemployment. Germany looks like it's in a never-ending cycle of boom and depression, misery and high unemployment.
But for Hitler, this disastrous situation is an opportunity.
The person who's cheering the most is Hitler, because he now looks like a guru. He's actually predicted that this would happen, and it's actually happened. And of course, a lot of people are swayed when somebody is proved right.
Hitler and his propaganda man, Joseph Goebbels, have a master plan to win power in Germany by democratic means. Goebbels throws himself into a campaign designed to appeal directly to the suffering German people.
It was very blunt and very simple. So, bread, work, freedom, direct slogans offering a lofty and noble vision of things that were lacking in Germany.
There's a famous poster, and it just shows a series of people who look in the middle of depression. It says, Germany's last hope, Hitler.
As part of his strategy, Goebbels sends Hitler on speaking tours across the country, traveling from town to town. Using his newly polished skills as an orator, they convince people they can make Germany strong again.
You've got to look at the position of your average German citizen who's feeling impoverished. The future looks very uncertain. How am I going to feed my children? Am I going to keep my job? And you look at this newfangled Weimar form of government and you're thinking it's not really giving the answers.
Goebbels' brilliantly orchestrated campaign allows Hitler to present himself as new and different.
None of the Weimar politicians had an ounce of the charisma that Hitler brought to the party. They were essentially bourgeois, middle-of-the-road, conventional politicians. Hitler swept all that away. He looked different, especially when he was in speaking mode or standing in a car, saluting his stormtroopers marching past. He looked little less than a god. And Germans had never seen anything like this before.
It's not just his image. Hitler has radical new policies. He promises to turn the economy around by refusing to pay war compensation to the Allies, as set out in the Treaty of Versailles after the First World War. And he promises desperate farmers in the countryside, who've seen the collapse of agricultural prices, a better life.
He says all of this misery that is heaped on rural communities is due to the Wall Street crash. Come to the Nazi Party and we'll give you a new deal for the rural voter.
Above all, he vows to put the unemployed back to work. But he also uses the opportunity to focus on his real agenda: the Jews. He blames the economic crisis on them.
He said it was all the Jewish plot. This notion has always been there. Our problems, they might be less at times, more intense at others, but they're always there and they're always Jewish in origin. The great bankers of the world are Jewish. It's a world international plot of the Jews to bring cultured civilizations under their control. People were ready to believe it. And of course he can say, get rid of the Jews and your jobs will come back.
When the election results come in that September, the Nazi strategy works. They win almost 6.5 million votes. At the last election in 1928, they'd managed only 810,000. Their representation in the Reichstag, Germany's parliament, grows from 12 seats to 107. It's just 36 seats fewer than the biggest party in the ruling coalition, the Social Democrats. The Nazis are now the second most popular party in Germany. With the governing coalition riddled with instability and infighting, Hitler knows that there will be another election soon. So he and Goebbels set about capitalizing on their success by increasing the Nazi Party's profile.
Hitler said, I want to be noticed. I want Germany to notice us. He said, propaganda comes first, ideas come second.
Their very best propaganda tool is the rally. Since 1927, the Nazis have held their annual rally in the medieval city of Nuremberg. 100 miles north of Munich, it's one of the areas which is the most sympathetic to the Nazi cause. By the early 1930s, and in the years that follow, the rallies reach a truly colossal scale.
Hitler seemed to know instinctively what would work and what would hit the masses.
Venues decorated with flowers and Nazi symbols are surrounded on all sides by the uniformed SA brown shirts.
You would have men marching in immaculate ranks in perfect uniforms. You would have red and white swastikas on huge banners.
Down to the smallest detail of insignia, medals, songs, music, marching. They paid great attention to all of this, and they sought through this to portray the Nazi Party as one of order, unity, of loyalty, of discipline.
For added drama, many of the rallies reach their climax at night.
Nazis made very effective use of special lighting effects at nighttime. There were torchlit processions. This was not just a formal political event, it was a spiritual coming together of the nation and the culmination of an almost religious experience.
With the masses in eager anticipation, finally comes the main event, the arrival of Hitler. It's another piece of carefully constructed audience manipulation.
I don't think there's any record of ever starting a speech at the scheduled time. He made people, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes 40, sometimes an hour, hour and a half. Heighten the expectation. When will he come? Is he coming? And then the whisper would go round, yes, he's coming, he's approaching. And this buzz would go round the great auditorium.
Then, from the back of the arena, Hitler would walk in, the floodlights would come on him.
After an accompaniment of drums, fanfares and Nazi salutes, Hitler then starts his speech.
He whispered to begin with. People strained to hear him.
He knows how to conduct the crowd. It's kind of quite quiet. You need to turn the volume up. Is he stuttering? You're kind of worried that he's forgotten what he's going to say. So you feel slightly sympathetic towards him.
And then build up, get slightly faster. And then the gestures would come in. The flung out arm, the hand going back, and that, he should do that. As if there was an intensity in him that had to be expressed.
This is all perfect theatre, and it looks so powerful, and no one else has really done this before.
And of course, if you're halfway towards him anyway, it's enrapturing.
At the end of the speeches, Hitler is left drained and bathed in sweat. He gives the impression that he has given all for his congregation. Floating voters, who have been skeptical of the Nazis, are won over.
And nearly all those who observed this said, you were carried away by it. You could not but be impressed. You came as a doubter, you went away as a devotee.
But if the adoring fans think they know him, they don't. Behind the scenes, a scandal is brewing in his personal life, which is about to threaten his newfound popularity. Hitler's public image may be one of a man selflessly devoted to his cause. But the reality is very different. In private, Hitler has fallen in love. The object of his affection is the 23-year-old daughter of his half-sister, Angela. Her name is Gaily Raubel. In 1929, Angela had come to work for him at his plush new apartment, number 16, Prinz Regentenplatz.
Originally, Gailey's mother was brought from Austria as Hitler's housekeeper, and Gailey came along as part of the deal. But Hitler soon became totally obsessed by this young woman.
He was very, very fond of her. He took her everywhere. They would go out to a cafe in town, and she would be there. Wherever he went, you know, there would be Gailey.
Hitler even supports his niece's musical aspirations, paying for Gailey to have singing lessons.
This relationship, despite the fact they're basically related and there's 2 decades between them, almost seems to be actually a fairly nice, wholesome, sweet relationship. They're going for drives together, they go eating out together.
Even today, the precise nature of the relationship remains the subject of speculation.
It seems it wasn't sexual. It may sound odd to say that, but it was possession without the sex bit, if there can be such a phenomenon. Fascinating that a man with that degree of power should have been so restrained in that way. It may be he simply was asexual.
But by 1931, Hitler's relationship with Gailey starts to turn sour. Naturally flirtatious and vivacious, Gailey's behavior makes him jealous.
She was a normal, red-blooded young woman, wanted to go out, wanted to dance, wanted to wear makeup. All these things were anathema to Hitler's ideas of what a woman should do, should look like, should conduct herself.
He starts to take too much interest in who she's talking to. For example, his chauffeur, Emil Morris, starts to become close to Gailey.
Hitler, when he finds out about the relationship, goes berserk. Now, Hitler's well known for going berserk, and Emil Morris is on the receiving end. Hitler, you know, threatens to shoot him. This is the turning point in the relationship, clearly, between him and Gailey.
From now on, everything Gailey does has to be monitored and controlled. If Gailey leaves the apartment, Hitler makes sure she's chaperoned and home early. But as Hitler's possessiveness grows, so does Gailey's unhappiness. By September 1931, the situation reaches a head.
Gailey has become increasingly despondent and miserable, as indeed you would be if you were imprisoned by a man that she would describe as a monster. Hitler wouldn't let her go anywhere, and it seemed that she had somehow developed a relationship with a young man from Vienna.
It's not just that she's met a young man. It's who he is.
The biggest crime in Hitler's eyes about this young man was that he was Jewish. So this is obviously not a fantastic relationship for Gailey to be trying to have behind the back of Hitler.
Matters reach crisis point. On the 18th of September, Hitler is preparing to leave for a Nazi meeting in Nuremberg when Gailey becomes hysterical.
She wants to go and do singing lessons in Vienna. It all builds up. People start to hear blazing rows inside the flat. The next door neighbour says at one point Hitler leaves the flat, turns round as he gets into his chauffeur-driven Mercedes and shouts back, "You're not going to Vienna, and that's the end of it."
For Gailey, the consequences of the argument are fatal. The tragic death of the 23-year-old music student makes news worldwide. Immediately, rumors circulate about the rising politician's relationship with his niece.
There were reports that she had bruises over her body that may have come from being punched. These weren't authenticated or corroborated. But it's possible He lashed out at her. I wouldn't say that's proven, but it's possible he did that. It does fit his possessiveness.
Rumours detailing Hitler's sex life are also leaked.
She was supposed to have told Emil Morris that Hitler made her pose for pornographic pictures, naked, standing over him, and even defecating on him, that Hitler was a coprophiliac. These rumours were seized upon naturally by Hitler's political opponents, especially by the Social Democrats, and they were published in various social democratic magazines. Never proved. I must emphasise that.
Worst of all are the suggestions that Hitler has either had Gailey murdered or that he's killed her himself. For the would-be Führer and for the Nazis, the potential political fallout from Gailey's death is enormous. So the party's propaganda team act quickly to prevent a scandal. To save Hitler's reputation, members of his inner circle say that Gailey had been playing with a gun and had accidentally killed herself. But behind closed doors, Hitler is devastated by Gailey's death. Friends fear he might give up politics altogether. Some, that he might take his own life. Confessing to those close to him that Gailey is the only woman he has ever truly loved, Hitler commissions sculptures and portraits of her, and orders that her bedroom is preserved exactly as she left it.
Hitler turned the room where Gailey died into a shrine for her. He would actually go into the room and spend long hours contemplating her picture and thinking about her. She was, you could say, the one love of his life, and it's maybe a testament to Hitler's perversity that the one love of his life was a girl young enough to be his daughter, who was in fact his niece.
2 days after Gailey's funeral, a heartbroken Hitler visits Gailey's grave. And to the relief of those around him, he finally shakes himself out of his anguish. In public, the party's PR strategy seems to work. The German people give Hitler the benefit of the doubt, and he emerges from what could have been a scandal virtually unscathed. And to avoid anything like this happening in the future, Hitler ensures he's never seen to have any sort of close relationship with a woman again.
The death of Gailey made him realise that actually if he was going to set himself up as this kind of messiah-like figure, he really couldn't be publicly associated with women. He felt that had he had a wife or female figure in his life, it would have reduced his appeal to German women at large.
In keeping with his strategy, Hitler's next girlfriend will be hidden from all but his inner circle.
Eva Braun is kept in the background. She is never seen in any photographs with Hitler. For the public, Hitler is married to Germany.
As Hitler readies himself for the next phase in his quest to seize power, he's more determined than ever. His propaganda machine relaunches him, this time aiming at the highest office in Germany. Hitler stands in the presidential elections. His key rival candidates are communist Ernst Thälmann and the existing president, Germany's most illustrious statesman and most famous war hero, Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg.
Hitler's grown enormously in self-confidence with every success that the Nazis have had. Here is a man, an unknown Austrian, a foreigner in many people's eyes, standing against the wooden titan of Hindenburg, the great gigantic figure, larger than life, who had loomed over German lives ever since World War I.
Hitler wavers for a bit should he challenge this great popular figure, Hindenburg, and in the end he decides to do it.
The Nazi Party coordinate yet another campaign to indoctrinate the masses. In a never-before-seen strategy, the Nazis embark on a plan to reach almost the entire German population.
Goebbels devised a campaign device called Hitler over Germany, in which Hitler flew from town to town and city to city in a plane, and the troops were on the ground waiting to see the Führer descend from the skies like some sort of avenging angel falling down from the clouds, and it made an enormous impact.
Working around the clock with demonic energy, during the campaign Hitler makes 20 major speeches in less than a week.
Exhausting. I mean, he'd collapse after the speech and just sleep until the next meeting. Huge physical effort on his part. And if at any point he becomes a man of the people, I think you could say that was the time.
When the presidential elections take place, he sees the effects. Hindenburg polls just over 50%. The communist candidate, 10%. But Hitler takes nearly 37%. He has run the much-respected Hindenburg a close second.
Hitler loses the 1932 presidential election, but in fact he wins it, because now he is unquestionably the most popular civilian leader in Germany. He's now got 13.4 million people. He's put on 7 million more voters in 2 years. 7 million more Germans, out of their own free will, have moved towards him.
And he comes up with yet another new tactic to help him win people over. He produces a series of postcards and coffee table books together with Nazi photographer Heinrich Hoffmann. Their purpose is to portray Hitler as a normal man.
Hoffmann's images weren't just formal shots of Hitler standing on a podium lecturing to regimented masses. Much more frequent were pictures that showed Hitler as an ordinary man. Hitler in Bavarian folklore outfit, sitting in the woods, having a picnic. Hitler playing with the dog. Hitler wearing a raincoat, an ordinary shirt and a battered hat, doing not very much at all. It was very calculated. He wanted to be seen as someone who paused, who enjoyed the leisure to think and to reflect. Really a man of the people.
After the presidential elections, Hitler sets out to build on his growing popularity. He gets the chance because the governing coalition is terminally unstable, triggering a spate of elections.
In 1932, it seemed that the German people were involved in a permanent election campaign. There were so many elections, national and local, and this is a clear sign that no party could rule in the Reichstag, that democracy had run into the sand and that it did not provide stability.
2 elections in July and November of 1932 see the Nazis virtually double their support from 1930. They are now the biggest party in the Reichstag. It's not enough to take power, but it is enough to paralyze the government. Hitler piles the pressure on the ailing President Hindenburg and demands to be made Chancellor, Germany's equivalent of Prime Minister. But Hindenburg doesn't trust him, and he flatly refuses. Hindenburg only offers him the position of Vice-Chancellor. Hitler turns it down. He wants power on his own terms. So he sets about wooing Germany's most influential people.
He brings together a whole group of industrialists. He said to them, you have only prosperity to look forward to under us. We are not a threat. If we join together, I as a great political leader and you as great industrialists, we have a great future together. We can work together. He meets the army leaders and says to them, I was a soldier, I understand you. The army is critical in the new Germany that we're going to create. You are the strength, you are the defense of Germany. And he wins them over.
Hitler's quest to broaden his appeal is successful. The Nazis are no longer just the choice of the working classes. White-collar voters like teachers, engineers and lawyers are turning to Hitler, fearful that a communist government will tax them to feed the poor.
It's what some call the Mittelstand in German, that middle section, the section that matters, Hitler said. Respectable people. Old Germans, if you like, in that sense. Young in age, but old in terms of their reference back to German values, German cultural standards and so on.
Someone else Hitler manages to impress is former Chancellor Franz von Papen. He's dismissed from power in November 1932, following a vote of no confidence. Though not a Nazi, he is sympathetic to Hitler and organizes a secret meeting between key members of Hitler's inner circle and the president's son, German Army Major Oskar von Hindenburg.
This is a really important meeting because at that meeting, Oskar, who's been skeptical about whether Hitler will rule without becoming a dictator, he starts to get convinced by Hitler. Hitler charms him.
In return for promotion in the army and 5,000 acres of land, Oskar agrees to convince his father to hand the chancellorship to Hitler. Crucially, von Papen reassures both President Hindenburg and his son that he can keep Hitler under control. Within a week, the president concedes. Hitler is appointed Chancellor of Germany. But the Nazis still don't have a majority government. So, Hitler quickly calls another election. To guarantee a majority, he needs to win over the left-leaning voters and overcome the communists. Within days, events conspire to help him. Just 6 days before the general election, Germany's parliament building, the Reichstag, is set on fire.
The culprit is swiftly arrested, and it emerges he's a young Dutch man called Marinus van der Lubbe.
Van der Lubbe is a known communist.
He is the classic lone nut, if you like, the kind of Lee Harvey Oswald of this situation, where we don't know whether he acted alone. All we know is that once the fire was underway, nobody was going to try and put it out, because straight away the Nazis could see that this fire could be exploited against the communists
President Hindenburg's response to the fire is to declare a state of emergency across Germany. Hitler takes advantage. He manages to convince Hindenburg to let him suppress the communists. As Chancellor, Hitler can send in the state police alongside the SA brown shirts and the SS.
The SA and the SS are let loose with public backing, because most of the public think this is a communist plot. The burning of the Reichstag, this great symbol of German constitutionalism, has been attacked by the communists.
The SA and the SS are unbound. The SA are able to pretty much attack and kidnap their communist opponent, drag them off to torture cellars, and submit them to violence, terror and extortion.
4,000 communist politicians and their supporters are beaten up, imprisoned and murdered, destroying them as a political force. But even that isn't enough to win Hitler power. In the general election of March 1933, the Nazis take just under 44% of the vote, agonizingly short of an overall majority. So Hitler decides to find a way around the democratic process. What he comes up with is the Enabling Act. In a time of crisis, it allows him to temporarily suspend the constitution and to take total control in Germany for the next 4 years.
If it's voted in favour by an absolute majority, that will allow Hitler to transfer power to himself so that he can enact law without the need to use Parliament.
But to pass the act, the Nazis need a 2/3 majority in Parliament. Hitler now starts schmoozing the key German Catholic Centre Party within the coalition. He reassures them that their party will continue to exist, that the Church's civil liberties will be preserved, as will Catholic involvement with German culture and education. Hitler sets out his case for the Enabling Act in a speech to Parliament. He promises to end unemployment and pledges to promote peace with France, Britain and Russia. When the by now sick and weakening President Hindenburg accepts the act, the Reichstag are invited to vote on it. All of Hitler's hard work finally pays off. With a massive 441 to 94, the Nazis gain the 2/3 majority they need to pass the Enabling Act. Ironically, the democratic process has handed Hitler the power to do anything he wants without parliamentary approval.
It gives Hitler basically dictatorial powers, powers that no leader in Germany has had for a very long time.
Hitler has at last got the authority he has craved for so long. Now, he must hold on to it. He starts by addressing the threats to his power, both inside and outside his party. The biggest internal threat is Ernst Röhm. Röhm is one of the earliest Nazi Party members and a close friend of Hitler. He is also the founder and leader of the SA Brown Shirts, the party's army of thugs whose bully boy tactics have been so significant in Hitler's rise.
There was a real bid for power from within the Nazi Party, from the Brown Shirts. They, with some justification, had seen themselves as the battering ram that had opened the gates of power for the Nazis.
By 1934, the SA are 4.5 million strong and massively outnumber the German army. The team around Hitler become increasingly concerned that Röhm will use them to seize power for himself.
Röhm starts to make speeches calling for the SA to become a people's army. And this makes the German army very nervous indeed.
And there were rumours, strong rumours, that Röhm was waiting for the moment to seize power himself in a coup, remove Hitler and govern as the head of this very powerful force.
And Röhm has committed another crime. Germany is still an intensely conservative country. And Röhm is a homosexual. In secret, Hermann Göring, now Prussian Minister of the Interior, and Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, ask Himmler's deputy, Reinhard Heydrich, to assemble a dossier to discredit Röhm.
By the end of June 1934, amazingly, the evidence that Röhm is a traitor has been found. There's this documentation that shows he's the recipient of millions of marks from the French government to try and overthrow Hitler on their behalf. Of course, it's completely manufactured evidence.
Armed with the information from Göring, Heydrich and Himmler, Hitler organizes a deadly trap. He orders all the SA leaders to attend a meeting in the pretty holiday town of Bad Wiessee in the far south of Germany. In the early hours, Hitler, some of his entourage, and a couple of state police arrive at a lakeside hotel in the town.
About 6:30 in the morning, Hitler charges into the hotel, brandishing a pistol.
In a scene which would astonish the German people, who believed they were voting for a respectable politician, the Chancellor of Germany can't resist taking matters into his own hands. In a sign of his fury over Röhm's supposed treachery, Hitler personally leads the team to arrest him. He doesn't even wait for his backup, the SS, to arrive.
He makes his way to Röhm's room, opens the door and says, "Get up, Ernst, you're under arrest for high treason." The sleep, dazzled and bewildered Röhm doesn't understand what's going on.
Now, in the next door room, there's another senior SA man, and with the SA man in bed is a young SA man. And, of course, this is deemed to be flagrant and sign of how degraded the SA had become and how corrupt it had become.
Over the next 24 hours, 200 other senior SA officers are rounded up. Many are shot. Others, including Röhm, are sent to Munich's Stadelheim prison. But it isn't just the internal opponents Hitler deals with. He and Goebbels have been compiling a list of political opponents and old enemies they also consider to be traitors. Now they trigger the next purge. A code-worded phone call from Goebbels to Göring sets in motion what will become one of the most notorious events in the history of the Nazis. The following day, Hitler hosts a tea party in the garden of the Chancellery in Berlin for his cabinet and their families.
While this tea party is going on, the playing out of The Night of the Long Knives is almost pure Godfather 2. It is like a gangster film. There are people being massacred. I mean, literally just butchered, shot, killed, and beheaded.
Amongst those killed are Gustav von Kahr, one of the triumvirate who had sabotaged the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923.
He was hauled out of his home, taken to a forest in Dachau outside Munich where the concentration camp was, and battered to death with axes. The former Chancellor, General von Schleicher, who is shot down in his own home when he answers the door, and his wife, who tries to throw herself across in front of the bullets. She's cut down by a hail of bullets too. A music critic called Willy Schmidt was mistaken for an SA man called Willy Schmidt and was shot down in Munich. There were lots of cases like this.
During that afternoon, Hitler gives the order to kill Ernst Röhm. He's shot dead by the SS in his cell.
At one point during this tea, someone's meant to have come in and just gently informed him that everything had been carried out, and he just nods.
It was Hitler's settling of accounts, the Night of Long Knives, with the right and with the left. And it was serving notice on the world that Germany was now ruled by gangsters.
The Night of the Long Knives is announced by Hitler himself in a speech to the government on the 13th of July, 1934. Official records state that only 77 have died, but really, it's 400. And Hitler now justifies what he has done.
In this hour, I was responsible for the fate of the German people, and thereby I became the supreme judge of the German people. I gave the order to shoot the ringleaders and their treason.
Hitler's actions and words hammer home that he is now judge and jury, with the power to decide who lives and who dies.
The Night of Long Knives gave a notice not only to Germany, but to the world that you opposed the Nazis the slightest whim at the very peril of your own life. If they were prepared to cut down those who'd once been nearest and dearest to them, they were prepared to cut down anyone.
2 weeks later, the 87-year-old President Hindenburg passes away. Hitler abolishes the presidency and declares himself supreme leader of Germany. The Führer.